John, triple digits, baby.
We're there. We're there. I didn't know if we'd ever get here, Rich, but we're there. 100 episodes. It's unbelievable to think about when we first started. And I can remember vividly the first day we talked about potentially doing this together, and the thought that we'd be here at this moment. And it feels like not that long ago. And it feels like we're on a track to maybe add another zero to that end in multiple years from now. But it's been fun. It's been exciting, and can't wait to kind of break down the first 100 with you.
I'll tell you, one of the most surprising things is there have been 100 people that want to hop on our podcast. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, no doubt.
I got to say, before we jump into some of our personal highlights, I got to say the quality of guests we have been able to bring on has surprised me. It really has. And it was difficult to go through and select a few highlights for myself. I mean, literally, you could name any guest, and I probably have at least one or two things that I learned from them, that I remember about them, that they're branded by in my mind. And I have so much appreciation and gratitude for our guests, first of all. Second of all, for you. And I'll start by saying one of the things that I've learned over the course of this with you, from you, is this ready, fire, aim. And that I can trust myself to just go do something, not have it all figured out, and trust that we'll figure it out along the way. And we certainly didn't have all the answers when we started. We certainly don't have all the answers now. But everything from getting a different microphone set up at some point, to how we're talking to guests, to how we prep, we've really figured it out along the way. And for the listeners that have been with us on this journey, we hear on a weekly basis how much they appreciate the work we've done. And I got to say, I've learned a ton myself, and I have nothing but gratitude for being on this journey with you. And thank you.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun, Rich. And likewise, there's a reason why sometimes when people go work out, if they're doing it by themselves, they stop doing it. Or, it's better to always do a nutrition contest with somebody else, or a workout contest, or a weight loss contest, or something with a partner, because you have that team accountability. And I could just imagine if I had started this myself, I'd get 7 episodes in, I think is the standard in the industry, where you go 7 episodes in and you stop recording because you don't know where you're going. You don't know how you're going to make any money. You can't figure it out. And I think the accountability of knowing that every week I get to talk with my best friend about topics we love, and we can also learn from and sharpen our own saw and have an impact to other people, is a tremendous gift that we have. For many years, Rich, we would talk once a year, maybe twice a year.
Yeah.
And we'd get together like once every other year, maybe. And now we can talk every single week and have a reason to reconnect ourselves. Very selfish reason. But man, what a great opportunity we have. And I would encourage others who can partner up with their friends or spouses to create something together. What a gift I now feel we have, that I never want this to stop. I want to keep going. And I think the big piece for me too, Rich, I think is worth talking about just before we break down some of our top episodes, is a lot of people ask, like, why are you doing it? What's your why?
Yes.
And our whys may be a little bit different, but I also think they're the same. We're not looking to make money through this podcast or get advertisers or have millions of views and compete with Joe Rogan out there. That wasn't why we started this in the first place, which I think is why we're still here. It's not about creating money through this business opportunity called a podcast. Really, our why to begin with, or at least my why, is on a selfish purpose: sharpen my saw, expand my network, spend time with you, learn, grow. And that has absolutely happened, all of those. And then on the other side, it's really making an impact to the entrepreneurs that I care about, that I talk with on a weekly basis, or I get to meet along the way. And when they ask me questions about entrepreneurship or business, I can say, oh yeah, go back and listen to episode number 38 with Cameron Harold, or this episode or that episode, and really reference them back to really, quality content and podcast guests that we've had throughout the past 100 episodes. To me, imagine having 500 of those and being able to look back and go, yeah, let's remember this conversation with this individual and how much we learned from it, and sharing that with our entrepreneurs. So that's my why. I'm sure that connects with you quite a bit as well.
Yeah, it sure does. I know my why has a couple parts to it. One, very similar to yours: enjoying connecting with you and doing something together. that's a little entrepreneurial in its own right. And it's been years since we've been able to find something to do that with. And although this is entrepreneurial, it's not a moneymaker, and we're doing it for our own education, our connection, and to impact others.
Yeah.
One of my things is as a personal life mission is wanting to impact more people more deeply, more quickly. And I have an opportunity to do that through CertaPro and the role that I have. But this is another avenue to make an impact with people. And when I have an opportunity to do that, I feel a responsibility to my life mission to follow through and do something, particularly that I enjoy. You know
Yeah.
what I didn't predict, John,
What?
is all of the value that I've been able to bring to CertaPro, either in the knowledge that I've received from our guests or directly referring our guests to franchise owners or corporate staff members or program drivers. And I'll kick it off and I'll say the first person that I can think of that we really have created a wonderful working relationship with is Michael Lasso.
Yeah.
He was episode 22.
Mhm.
And one of the first things that stood out to me when I thought of that particular episode was in the moment that I said something to him. I don't even remember what I said. And I backed it up with, I'm not challenging you. And he kind of stroked his chin and said, "Oh, Mr. Hoffman, I have the dossier on you now." And it felt like actually an embarrassing moment. I remember feeling embarrassed in that moment. Like, oh, does that mean like I don't like being challenged? Is that but I didn't know what exactly that was. And we got off the podcast with him. He delivered us some feedback that literally we were creating a few too many sound bites for ourselves in our episodes, and that we should really highlight and honor the guest, and that should be the focus of it. And that was his recommendation. And he was not offended, but he thought maybe some other guests might be if we have too many sound bites for ourselves. Well, I don't know if you remember or not, but that particular weekend, I believe it was, of episode 22 with him, it was Larry King who died. And they were showing how Larry King interviewed people. And he said he stopped doing prep with his guests or for his guests
Mhm.
because he started to ask questions that his listeners could not resonate with because they weren't on the same level.
Yep.
And that's one of the things you and I started to do is do less prep so we can ask the questions that our listeners are thinking. And the other thing is the feedback from Michael really sharpened us to be able to ask questions that honor the person and their knowledge and occasionally challenge them and really highlight them and what they have to offer. And we started to move our commentary to the back half of the
Yeah.
episodes.
Yep.
And I think that's worked out really well. And by the way, since then, Michael has been the keynote speaker at our conference. We've had him train people one-on-one, our executives. I just came back a couple of weeks ago from a retreat that he did. And just what a partner in him we've had with CertaPro, and it's thanks to the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, Michael was a connection I had actually before we had this podcast. I attended a couple of his seminars, and I thought he would be a fantastic guest because of what he brings and the energy he brings and how direct he is with his message about communications and micro messaging is really one of the key messages that he brings to the table, which I think is fantastic because as a director, he was able to really assess people really, really quickly in the micro messaging and the messaging they give nonverbal, really, for the most part. And I learned a lot through that myself because everything you do, everything you wear, everything you say is a message. And he really makes you understand that as a communication expert. And so glad you guys have built that relationship because he's a phenomenal guy. And certainly a guest that I would say during and after the podcast gave us so much to think about. And specifically, made a major impact on you and your life, which I think is awesome. And I think that's, again, a byproduct selfishly of this podcast is if no one ever listened to episode 22 ever, the impact on you in that episode was phenomenal. And no surprise that that's your number one pick of episodes. For me, Rich, as I think about the episodes that I made an impact on me, but also the guests we were able to get, like you mentioned earlier, I'm surprised we're able to get some of the guests we were able to get on this podcast.
Yes.
One of the podcasts that really resonated for me, because I think he's making a massive impact in the business world, was Cameron Harold in episode number 38. And Cameron has a background similar to ours. From the franchise company, worked at 1-800 Got Junk for many years as the chief operating officer. And beyond 1-800 Got Junk, when he left there, created basically his own enterprise for COOs and the CEO Alliance, I believe it's called. And he's written a bunch of books. Really has motivated me to start thinking about, what am I ever going to have a piece of content that's worthy to be on a piece of paper? And when you think about Vivid Vision, for example, is one of his books. Meetings Suck. And the network that he's been able to build through all the content he produces, to have that guest on our show really was awesome. Not only to dive deeper into his learnings and everything he learned through his journey, but also the network that we were able to tap into as well through Cameron Harold and his group. So I know that you have a connection with Cameron Harold as well, because I know you've read his books, and a lot of his books are books that are very well known. And for us to have one of our guests who has books that when you mention, like, yeah, I've heard of that book before, or I've read that book before. He's one of those guests that fit into that category, and I hope we can get more and more of those known authors and known people who've written books that people in business read all the time.
You mentioned Vivid Vision, and it's interesting you mentioned that among other books. Many of our franchise owners who listen to Cameron Harold became aware of Vivid Vision, and that now has become part of vision planning for many of our owners and their staff, that they will read Vivid Vision to help them create a vision for themselves in their business and personal life. So absolutely impactful. I'll tell you another one that was impactful for me was Mike Cavanaugh. That was episode 80 when he talked about the coach's plan. And the way that he broke down, it just resonated with me, because I know it to be so true of myself, is I am able to coach someone else really well, but somehow I have a hard time coaching myself. And his whole magic, and I read his book, and his whole magic was separating the coach and the player within us. And he recommended going to bed at night, acting as the coach, making the recommendation on what the player needs to do the next day. What are a couple of things or one thing that the player needs to do the next day? And the coach is online. And then you wake up the next day and you're the player. You don't argue with the coach. You follow the coach's plan. And the coach can be wrong. But even if the coach is wrong, you got to execute the coach's plan. And then you can negotiate with the coach at night when it's time for the coach to make a new plan. But you don't negotiate the plan during the day. You execute the plan. And I have used that, not every single day and night, but there have been times that I have pulled that out to be able to tap into what I would coach others to do to help myself to achieve better performance the next day. And it's made a difference.
Yeah, that's amazing. And hearing that again and just refreshing my memory on that episode that you just talked about, it sounds so simple, right? But no one does it. They try and be the coach and the player at the same time, and that never really works. And the way he separates out, create the coach's plan the night before, and then you have to follow it the next day, and that accountability is very, very interesting. And one that I think we even challenged ourselves post episode. I don't know if we did it in the post recording, to do that with each other for a few days. Let's just do that. Let's write the plan the night before. We'll text it to each other, and then we'll actually follow it. I think it lasted a few days. I don't know if you keep doing it. It's made an impact on you, but we shared it with each other a couple times.
Yes.
I haven't kept up the discipline myself, but as I hear you talk, I'm like, man, why don't I keep doing that? It makes sense. Let's stay on the line of impact to oneself. Very selfish, maybe component, but as you talk about the coach's plan making an impact on you, or Michael also making an impact on you, there was one episode with Dr. Julie Bell, episode 16, very early on, that I think changed something for me that was so simple. Again, just a very simple concept. These 1-2 things you can learn from these episodes that for me, I'm sitting here right now with my notepads for the last couple of years. And since that episode, one of the things she talked about was having a blank sheet of paper 20 minutes a day to just write. And I think I combined this with something she said, but also maybe a couple other guests that we had, which is, start off your day with what are you grateful that happened? Grateful for that happened yesterday. What are you grateful for? What happened that's going to happen today? And then just let things come out. And the amount of thinking and writing I've been able to do in 20 minutes a day, I start the clock, I put it on my paper. Okay, I'm starting now. Computer's down, phone's away, and I'm going to write. When I have those days, I feel so much in control. Sometimes I'm writing about the meeting I have in 2 hours, and I want to put all my thoughts on paper before the meeting versus coming unprepared. Sometimes I'm thinking about the future. Sometimes I'm laying out my plan for the year. Sometimes I'm doing a whole bunch of things. But inevitably, I always think of something I can write. And a lot of times I look at the blank piece of paper and go, what am I going to write today? And it comes to you and you write and you just kind of unblock some things that you may be thinking about too much. So you just need to put on paper. And it made a tremendous amount of impact on me that I've done it ever since episode 16. Obviously, when I'm traveling or it's I have early meetings and it doesn't happen, that does occur. But I try every single day to have my 20 minutes of writing time. Made a huge impact on me. And I got to thank Dr. Julie Bell for that.
I know you've been really disciplined to that. I've done it less frequently than you have, but boy, the magic to that of sitting down with a blank piece of paper and no agenda and just putting your thoughts through your hand. There's something to that you said the word unblock, like there's some liberation to, there's no agenda, there's no purpose. You don't have to accomplish something. You could doodle if you want, like just being with your mind and your hand and a blank piece of paper and the magic that can come out of that. I've experienced it the times that I've done it myself. I'm going to highlight Merritt Khan. She was episode 78. And Merritt Khan, I asked her, what is your simple definition of emotional intelligence? I think I even said to her, I have a consultant who actually was on the podcast, also a coach of mine and consultant, who has his definition of strategy. That's the allocation of scarce resources. I said, Merritt, do you have something similar for emotional intelligence? Because it tends to be really wordy. And her answer was, how well do you understand your own emotion and how it impacts others? Boom. Mic drop.
Yep.
Everything that we can unpack about emotional intelligence can be tied into that sentence somehow. How well do you understand your own emotions and how they impact others? I'll tell you one other thing that I got from Merritt. If you remember, she had a pillow in the background of her frame that said, "Are you open to?"
Yep.
So that was really good, obviously, because when you're asking somebody something and you'd like to get something done or have a conversation or are you open to? Nobody wants to be closed. Generally, they're going to say, yeah, they're open to it. So those are two things I picked up from Merritt that I thought were valuable.
Yeah, that's awesome, Rich. And, certainly when you just think about these small little tidbits that stick with you for so long, one of the ones I know made a lot of impact to a few people that I had spoken to post our episode and recording was Manny Pata, episode number 20. I got a lot of feedback on that one in terms of, wow, I learned a little bit. A lot of the guests we've had are focused on the leadership front. We've had some guests in the finance front. We've had some guests in marketing. Where Manny Pata came in, and also another episode would have been Norman Rice. Can't remember exactly what number that was. Maybe came in more on the finance side of things, but finance, investing, different methods to invest. And Manny is a angel / venture capital investor out of Vancouver that I'd gotten to meet years ago, and we reconnected on this podcast. And there's one thing that he said in that episode that still resonates with me today, and it's been something I passed on to other people who have either been looking to raise capital or have talked to me about investing and things like that, which is, go to an investor and ask for money and you'll get advice. Go to an investor and ask for advice and you might end up getting money. And just that small little, tidbit, and how he talked about how I want to be approached. If you're coming to talk to me as an investor, here's how I want to be approached. I want to know that I can help you. I want to know that you're coming to me for advice. And maybe if I like you, then it will progress to something else. But you contact me and ask for money and, not going to answer. I don't know you. I don't know who you are. So just really building relationships is so critical. And I extrapolate that to other things, Rich. Way too many times, business owners contact bankers when they need something, not a couple of years before they need something to build a relationship. They call them when they need it. Entrepreneurs look for investors when they need money. It's not the right time to look for investors. Look for investors a couple of years before you need money and try and get them engaged in providing you maybe some free advice, which investors are always willing to give on how I can make my business better. And maybe a couple of years from now, they'll love your business so much they want to invest in it. And it's just that forethought that I think Manny brought to the idea that you need to think a little bit ahead of time how you're building relationships in the finance community. It should be everywhere for that matter, not just the finance community. But if you build those relationships in advance, when you get there, you'll know where to turn.
Powerful. I have to give a nod. Sorry to break in on that, but I have to give a nod to John Dame, who was the one who had the strategy as the allocation of scarce resources. When you were talking about if you ask for advice, you may get money. I think there's a component of humility in that's attractive. And I can't help but think of a podcast that we did with Gordon Blocker, who works with Pat Lincioni, and the ideal team player that is hungry, humble, smart. And you look at how Manny selects people who he invests in. I don't know. I don't believe we talked about it on the podcast. And I don't know that Manny's read the book, but I bet he selects by hungry, humble, and smart. And part of the humility is not coming in and saying, you should give me money because I have my act together. But it's coming in and saying, I'd like some advice because I'm not clear on a couple of areas. And that's more attractive to put money into consequently.
No question.
I'd highlight Scott Drake next. He was episode 81. We talked about the 4 goals and the 9 jobs of leadership that he was able to distill from 5 years of research. Asking the question, how do you know you're being a good leader? You want to be a good leader, right? How do you know when you're being a good leader?
Yep.
And he had said every leader he had asked that of kind of had deer in the headlights. Like, how do we know we're being a good leader? And they'd kind of stumble around a few things and, that's not quite it. And so I had to send him on a 5-year research project where he came up with the 4 goals and the 9 jobs of leadership. And I'll tell you, John, coming up in, I don't remember, 7 weeks or so, I'm going to be having him on virtually with 8 of our franchise owners at an offsite in Denver. And he's going to be talking about the 4 goals and the 9 jobs. And we had all the franchise owners involved listen to the podcast. I got multiple people who replied and said, boy, I got a lot out of that just listening to it. And the opportunity to ask Scott some questions about how to apply that in their business is just so valuable.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the fact that he's coming to speak to your group just shows how much of an impact that had on you, and realizing a lot of people can learn from this. I'm going to bring us, is one of my next ones here, to the episode with Jeff Rendell, which was episode number 85. And again, somebody that we've had a relationship with, you more so than me, for that matter. So maybe it made more of an impact on me because you had spent so much time with Jeff over the years. Although I had met Jeff, spent some time with him, didn't really get to the deep root of learning more about him until this episode. And what a quality guy. I think we ended the episode saying, Jeff, like, you got a book in you somewhere, like that's got to come out. And what they're doing at Cultivate Advisors that I thought was unique, very, very, very unique, and very, very calculated. And that I love this because you and I sometimes approach leadership and business from 2 different angles, was their methodology of start with the financials when they start consulting businesses. And they're not a finance firm, but they want to know, what's the health of this business? What's the P&L? What's the cash flow? What's the balance sheet? Is the bookkeeping being tight? Like, because you can't go work on the health of an entrepreneur business until that's tight or they know what's going on. And then they go to growth versus capacity. Growth being the sales side of it, capacity being how's your team, how's your processes, can you handle it? And I just love the simplicity of that methodology versus, oh yeah, we're a consulting firm. We do leadership consulting or entrepreneurial consulting. Well, what does that mean? I think that he was able to articulate in such a clear fashion. The other thing that he brought to light, which I loved, was just how they spend time as an organization. I think we learned a little bit of this from Cameron Harold as well, I believe, going on retreats with their executive team and doing things they've never done before. And, I think we talked about, four-wheeling somewhere, a bunch of different experiences that they have as a team to develop the culture of a team. And way too many times, I've been here way too many times, we're going to have a summit. We're going to have a conference, and here's your agenda, and come in your business suit, and you go from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And yeah, there's some fun in there, but it's a business meeting. And I think what I loved about what Jeff talked about there was really that retreat format for the executives and partners in the firm that, man, I'd love that. I mean, wouldn't you love every year to be able to go somewhere with people you work with and the relationships you'll build by having experiences? So I really love that conversation as well.
Well, and you're exactly right on the impact that Jeff has made on me. I had years of working with him and being able to soak up his wisdom and how he works. He is truly a leader of leaders. And John, when you talk about going on a retreat, as a matter of fact, in a few weeks, I'm going on a offsite with the primary team that I lead, and we're going to Kentucky because one of the members of that team has on his bucket list to go on the Bourbon Trail
That's
in
awesome.
Kentucky. So, we have to work our meeting around going on the Bourbon Trail, of course, and make sure that we genuinely have a productive meeting. But he's knocking something off his bucket list, and we're doing it as a team.
Yep.
How cool is that?
Incredible.
Next person I would highlight is Mike Hopkins. He was episode 34. And I remember him by just even the title that we titled that episode, Gentle with People, Tough on Results. And I remember one of the things that Mike said that impacted me most that I remember, I didn't even have to look at my notes for, is love makes good business sense. Just loving your people.
Yeah.
And I find so many leaders are afraid to say that they love their people because the word love may have a funny connotation to it somehow. Or if they say they love their people, that somehow that puts them in a position where they can be held hostage because their people know just how valuable they are. And like Mike is so opposite to any of that. He's like, I tell my people I love them all the time. It makes good business sense to love your people and really care about them and really genuinely invest in them and have a real relationship outside of just that person doing the thing that happens to keep the business going or make money. And I think Mike is a tremendous example of blending head and heart in good business leadership.
Wow, not only a tremendous example, and complimenting one doesn't mean that you're saying others aren't. Absolutely not. But the authentic leader in Mike Hopkins was very impactful. I can absolutely remember to you say the head and the heart was completely engaged in his people and his business, and that's a pretty unique trait. Certainly one that I can learn from. In terms of sometimes I'm a little too much head and not enough heart. And I think that was one that definitely made an impact to me. To go, oh, there's a different way to lead here. Very unique, authentic individual. I'm going to go to one maybe completely opposite to what you just brought up. But before I do, I will bring up an episode with Sean Shepard, which was episode 50, that plays into Mike Hopkins' comment, which is the quality of your life is based on the quality of your conversations and relationships. And having authentic conversations and true conversations and loving conversations. And I think that's another extension of Mike Hopkins, is he was able to have authentic relationships because it wasn't just about head and business and this and that. He connects. He has family dinners with his people. He really connected. And so Sean Shepard hit that a little bit as well in his episode. But
I think I know where you're going.
Where?
On the other side of Mike Hopkins.
Give it to me.
Who loves people. The other side of that coin would be Randy Soma. Who
That's right.
About, leadership and really prioritizing profit over people and the damage that that's done to business culture. So not to steal your thunder, But out of 100 episodes, I knew exactly where you were going.
Yeah, no, exactly. And just to be clear, it's not Randy Soma himself. It's the content that Randy Soma brought us in his book, Leader Shit.
Thank you for that clarification.
Right? We talked a lot about what's destroying companies from the inside out. And it's the boardrooms. It's the focus on profits over people. And he was so disgusted with it that he wrote a book about his experiences and how companies are being destroyed because they're trying to get that extra earning, that extra growth. A lot of it was geared towards public companies and how they're driven, but a lot of it as well on the private companies and how can we stop it? And we came up with a really good conversation. That conversation where we asked him, well, what's the solution? Usually, you write a book, there's a solution, like do this, not that. But he was so perplexed with the problem that I don't think we actually came with a solution. And I think the comment was, once we find it, we'll write the second book. Because it's such a pandemic of a problem that there's so much focus specifically again on companies that have earnings reports and this, not, I mean, they're off by a penny and people lose their jobs and they lose their income. It's so high pressure that these aren't necessarily bad people, but they get put into positions where they have to make these types of decisions. And I've dealt with that a little bit in some of the worlds that I've dealt with venture capitalists or investors, that it's all about the dollar. It's not about the people, and the companies get destroyed from the inside out. So that's a huge problem we have. There's no real solution for it, but it's really scary.
Well, the interesting timing around when we had Randy Soma on was, if you remember, it was in the heat of the pandemic and companies were furloughing and laying people off left and right. And it was just very provocative timing almost to come on the podcast and deliver a message to our listeners about the importance of prioritizing people over profit, particularly at that time, but always. And if you prioritize people, ultimately the profit does come, especially if you do it in a Mike Hopkins way, where you are tough on results, but you're gentle with people. The people need to get the results, right?
Yep.
I'll highlight Erin Deal. Fail, yeah. That was a sign that was right behind her during the whole podcast. It was podcast 47. And one of the things, and I've not done it, but I've always remembered it, and maybe you and I should do this, is, do you remember her talking about doing a failure board quarterly?
Yes.
So
yes.
She got together with the people in her business, and quarterly they'd put together a failure board, which was one slide on a PowerPoint deck. And on that slide, they would put images and words and pictures and cartoons or whatever that would basically demonstrate their biggest failures over the last quarter. And then they would share that with each other. And part of that was to desensitize failure in the culture in her business. I just think so many business have this BS, best foot forward culture that people aren't being real with each other because they're trying to look good and be right instead of actually seek truth and put reality on the table. And it's, people fail. You fail. Now, you fail enough. You fail over and over and over and over. Maybe you're in the wrong job, but you're still going to have failures, and it's okay to bring them up and talk about them. And her putting that culture in her business, it was just inspiring. And like I said, I haven't done the failure board concept. I'd like to, but I didn't even have to read my notes to remember her by that. It was so impactful. Like, who does that?
Yeah. What a great concept. And actually that was a reminder for me of that concept, because I somewhat forgot about that somehow. But oh my gosh, celebrate failure.
Right.
Laugh about it. Have fun with it. Don't hide it. Don't just bring to the meeting all the reports that show how well you did and take all the reports that show you didn't go so well and don't bring them to the meeting. Go to the meeting and go, here are the top 3 things we failed at and celebrate it and go, you know what? We know, we're articulating it. We know it. Now we're going to go to work and try and make it better. So absolutely love that. And I'd love to get Aaron Deal and Michael Alasso in a room and have them, banter back and forth. That would be that'd be a great
Yes.
conversation. Definitely people on the improv side of things are very funny, and love to be very direct with their thoughts and feelings as well. Rich, for me, I want to go all the way back to number one. I don't know what episode 1000 is going to be, or 500 or 250. I have no idea. And hopefully we get there someday. But episode number one was pretty unique. Mike Stone, the CEO of CertaPro Painters, where you're currently employed, somebody who was gracious enough to encourage you on this journey to do this podcast. And hopefully the organization, as you mentioned before, is getting the rewards of the impact that we're learning from others and network and everything else. But Mike was also somebody that I had met 25, 30 years ago, and such a small world. And I don't really think people really understand that this person, Mike Stone, was a sales associate for a painting franchise business in the middle of Iowa, who had so much determination to succeed in business that he went from a sales associate all the way to the CEO of one of the largest painting company in North America. What an accomplishment. And the conversations we have in there about why, how did that happen? How did that come inside you as an intrapreneur, which we've mentioned so many times on this episode, that word. What does that mean to you? And why do you drive so hard? And to me, that story is one that, we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this episode. Absolutely. We also have a lot of intrapreneurs that listen to this episode. And if you're an entrepreneur, go straight to episode number one. If you're working within a company and you're trying to raise the ranks in the company and become a leader of that company, ultimately, the dedication, drive, desire that Mike Stone has had over the last 25, 30 years to become the CEO of a company is a story sometimes you only hear about. You don't get a chance to really dive deep and talk about. And to me, to kick off Entrepreneurs Unite with that episode was a gift that I love, and I always reference people back to that are really looking for that train, if you will, that channel from I'm now an employee, but I also want to be an entrepreneur. What does that mean, and how can I grow within this business and also grow as myself, as an individual, my family, everything else? So I really like to refer people back to that and thank him for this opportunity to have these conversations on a weekly basis.
And to your point, what an inspiration it is. Like, what an example of you can be anything you want. You can do anything you want. The franchise owner who employed him as a residential sales associate, do you think if he said, hey, someday I'm going to be president and CEO of over $500 million company, and I intend to lead it to $1 billion in my lifetime. Now, we're not there yet, but we are on our way. If he said that to that franchise owner, what do you think the franchise owner would have said?
Yeah.
Eh,
Go sell some more paint jobs.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it sounds good. Sell the next job, buddy. You're on your way.
Yeah.
And it's inspirational. And it's a reminder of that we're not too young or too old to dream again. That we still can be anything we want. And if we set our mind to it and work hard and stick with it, that we can do it.
Yeah.
Last one that I'll highlight is John Rossman, episode 88. And if you remember John, he was the guy who led the advent of the Amazon marketplace.
Yep.
And I think when we were offline, by the way, I think you had said to me, you were like, I don't know if he led it. And I was like, yeah, let's look up his bio. Sure enough. Yep. He led it. It's an example of a guest that's like, oh my gosh, like what a high quality guest. And he's on our podcast. One of the things that I got from him that I'm actively working to try to embed in our culture at CertaPro was what John referred to as a culture of 6-pagers. And the culture of 6-pagers was when somebody has a innovation, because one of their 14 leadership guidelines was innovate and simplify. And he said it's a 50-50 proposition. As hard as it is to innovate, it's equally hard to simplify that innovation. And the way that they did it is they put everything on paper and they wrote up the case study of what was the innovation. and when things were going to happen and what was a current state of the marketplace and how it would create profit later. And they did that so that they could get clarity on the part of the person who was innovating, that they would force clarity on their part to put it in full sentences instead of bullet points. It was distributable to others so that they could read all about it and they could contribute to it, like on a Word document. And then it also provided a written record of what the purpose of that innovation was, what the outcome was supposed to be, so they could come back and do a retrospective on, did that actually happen? And then the clarify and crystallize lessons learned. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I would love to like take my Saturday night for the next year and read about lessons learned from SortaPro specifically, but heck, I would do it from almost any company. Like, not a lot of places go back and do the retrospective, crystallize lessons learned and distribute those. That inspired me, and I'm actively working with some of our program drivers to create 6-pagers on their innovations because of that particular episode.
Yeah, that's awesome, Rich. And I won't be spending my Saturday nights doing that because I have Saturday night date night. But but to be clear, the other part that I loved about that episode and the conversation was there is no meeting that's held without this document. How many meetings do you go to and you walk in and you're like, let's figure out what we're going to talk about now. The subject is this, but we have no plan. The first 15 minutes, I believe, of the meeting is quiet time for everybody to just read the document, so they don't have to schedule prep before. They can come in, they can read the document, and then they can discuss it, versus feeling like everybody has to do prep and no one reads it before they come in and the meeting starts and no one knows what they're talking about because no one read the document. The discipline there is unbelievable. And I had no clue that actually happened at Amazon. It's not a very well promoted thing. You hear over the years the culture at Apple, the culture at Microsoft, and the things that some of these companies do as a normal practice. I had never known that about Amazon. And I think that was one of the episodes too, where before we were off air, you and I both ordered on Amazon the book called Think Like Amazon, 50 and a half Ideas to Become a Better Leader. We both went on and bought the book. I think you've read it since. I haven't gotten there yet because I'm still going through my books that I have to read. But for us to go want to buy that book directly on that episode was an impact, again, that was directly on us. And I think our viewers probably did the exact same thing. So absolutely love that. Rich, so many guests. One of my childhood idols from the Montreal Canadiens, Ryan Walters, on our episode 30, Pete Moore, 71. We can keep going on and on and on.
Mentors of ours like Jeff Wall, like Jeff Levitan. We already mentioned Jeff Rendell.
Yeah.
For anybody we're leaving out, I apologize. I mean, we've had high quality guests and more mentors than in this exact moment I can name off the top of my head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Rich, as we head towards the future where we're going, if you're still listening to us right now, thank you. Thank you to Erica and Nicole, who do a lot of work behind the scenes for the podcast. Much appreciated there. If you can, please leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. We don't ask for them a lot, but if you can, that really helps us and gives us a gift back from you listening. So please, if you can do that, we really appreciate it. And then even more importantly, we've had guest referrals from our listeners that have been very impactful to us in the conversations we've had from them. So if you're listening to this, you're like, you know what? I know an entrepreneur should be on Entrepreneurs United podcast. Please reach out to us. Please have them reach out to us. We love to record these every week. We love to put them out there. And Rich, I just can't wait to see who we have over the next 100 episodes. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll probably see some repeat guests, I guess, because there's a lot of guests we want to have back. So I just can't wait for the next year and a half, 2 years to get to that next milestone.
Well, I'm happy to be on a ride with you, and I'd say ready, fire, aim, buddy.
Let's do it.